So for me, there is absolutely nothing better than a past life regression where the client knows absolutely nothing about the topic they're talking about when they go to another lifetime. And I had one of those this week. It was really fun. So this wonderful young man came to see me, and he had a lot of different questions about things, and we jumped right in. And the first life he went to, he was a whale, and he was swimming through the ocean, and he was like a teenage male, and he was away from his little pod. He had a very small pod, only about 6 whales, but he was adventuring away in a very exuberant way. And the thing that was so interesting was the client really didn't have the language to talk about whales because he wasn't really familiar with very much about whales at all. He just knew they were big and swam in the ocean. So the first impression he had was how well he could see in the water. And he described it so well. He said, "My eyes aren't in front of my head, they're on the sides of my head." And so he said, it's as if I have a double screen, but somehow I put them together in my head. So it's like two TVs at once, but I'm seeing them at the same time. And puts it together in his head. So that was really cool. And then he said, I can go vertical or horizontal, which, you know what? I had this book I used to read my kids when they were little called Fish Do the Strangest Things, I think it was called. So I know a little bit about whales. And generally, I think whales, correct me if I'm wrong, sleep vertically and swim horizontally. So he was like thrilled. He was like, I can go up and down and I can go vertical. I just sort of hang there in the ocean. He thought that was really cool. And he went and joined his pod, and I said, which one are your parents? And he said, oh, we don't live like that. He said, we have the old mother, and she's everybody's mother. And it wasn't clear that she had given birth to him, although she probably had. There was old mother and there was old father. And he said, but old mother is more important because she can give life. And so within this community, she was the sort of one that everybody revered, which was pretty cool. Anyway, then he noticed that his head was very square. He was covered in barnacles, and he didn't have a fin, he said. He was smooth-skinned. Maybe he had a fin in the back. I can't remember now. Anyway, I asked him what the inside of his mouth looked like because I knew that was important. And he said, it's really weird. My whole mouth is just filled with straw, which I knew meant he was a baleen whale. So the way baleen whales eat is that they take in huge amounts of water, and then they go like this, and then the water squirts out, but then all the little plankton and shrimp are caught in the baleen, and they eat those. So he was like, I squish the water out through my mouth, and then the little fish are trapped and I eat them. And he really had never heard of a baleen before. So that was pretty cool, the way he called them straws. So then we went to a little bit into the future, and he was very, very worried. He just kept saying, I have a feeling that things are not going well. And the water was very cloudy. And this was because they'd gone someplace very, very cold, much colder than they had been before. And they were hearing sounds that they didn't like. And pretty soon he realized that it was a boat. There were a couple of boats near them, and they were scared of the boats. And I said, why don't you just leave the area if you know there's danger? And he said, because we belong here. They don't belong here. We belong here. And so they were sort of fighting for their position, and what was right. And he said the way they communicated being afraid to each other was with their eyes and with telepathy. And they could swim under the ice. So they were all kind of hiding from these boats, but there was a problem, and he could feel it. The mother needed to breathe. And he knew that going to the surface was going to be dangerous, and he was very worried about the old mother. The young baby whales, who he thinks he may have been the father of, were way down deep, and he said they were playing in little circles. and they didn't seem to be worried about anything. But he knew that the old mother was going to have to go up and breathe, and she actually went up and took a breath and came back down and didn't get trapped. But then he said he felt the need for a breath building in his body. And it was a terrible feeling because he felt like, I should have taken a breath before when I could. But now he knew he would have to go to the surface. And as they were preparing for this, he said all of the whales got into a circle with their tails touching, and he called it a choreography of defense, which I thought was very beautiful. But it didn't do any good. He had to go up to the surface, and when he did, they harpooned him instantly. And he described what the men on the boat looked like. He said they were very, very, very pale with beards and hats. And he said they looked very cold, and they were wearing thick sweaters. They stabbed him over and over again, pulled him to the surface, tied him with ropes to the side of the boat, and he could see red in the water and lots of bubbles from his thrashing. His family was frantic and screaming. He could hear them in the water, but they could not help him, of course. And they rope him around the boat, and he said, I'm draining. And then he finally died, and I said, what did death feel like for you? And he said, it just felt like a big sigh, like I just breathed out my life. Now, this part is really interesting. As his soul began to rise up above the ocean and look down at the boat where he saw his own body lying there, his only thought was like, well, what do they want with me? What do they want with me? And, I explained to the client that, people used to hunt whales for their oil, ambergris, and also for meat. Anyway, the realization he had as he was floating above these men was that just as he had inevitably had to go to the surface, there was nothing he could do about it. It was sort of like fate. It was not out of his hands. That these men were very, very poor, and they had to feed their families. And they looked at him and they felt terrible about having killed him. And so he realized that he was, on some level, their teacher as well. His death taught them something, which was that they didn't like doing this work. So I thought that was pretty beautiful. And then we integrated into, for the client, why he had specifically seen this life and what it was for him. And I'm going to tell you another story in another video about what happened when his spirit went up into the light, because it was really cool. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I just really love it. And when he came out of the session, he was like, I didn't know anything about whales, and I explained to him about baleen and other various things about sleeping vertically and blah, blah, blah. So you can imagine, makes my work very exciting. So I hope you enjoyed this, and here comes my dog to say hello. Say hello, Snowy. Say hello. This is my little puppy. Mwah. Ciao, see you next time.